Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Chris Yoko about creating and sustaining a transformative company culture and driving corporate social responsibility with impact. Chris Yoko, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have this conversation. We've been preparing for this episode for a couple weeks now, and I've been looking forward to talking with you. Today, we're going to be focusing on transformative company culture and social responsibility with impact. And I know you have a lot of experience and background in these areas, and so I look forward to the insights and the experiences that you'll be able to share in relation to these topics. As we get started today, I just wanted to share Chris's bio with everyone. Driven by a determination to make the world a better place, Chris Yoko is focused on helping people and the organizations they belong to pave the road to a more utopian world. He primarily does this by helping these like-minded organizations build and champion themselves using the most powerful asset, their web presence. When Chris isn't fearlessly leading, you'll likely find him on the ice playing hockey with his nose buried in a book or playing and exploring with his incredible wife and two daughters. What a wonderful background. Sounds like you have a beautiful family. I'm not a hockey player. In fact, I don't really understand hockey, and I'm not a very good ice skater, but that sounds like a lot of fun, and really such a pleasure to have you today.
Oh, happy to be here and happy to share.
Anything else about yourself by way of background, personal context that you'd like to share with listeners before we dive in?
No, I think that covers just about everything.
Okay, cool. So I like how you focus on your role in leading out to help people and organizations to find opportunities for driving sustainability in the world. I think that's beautiful. That's awesome, and we can leverage the various assets and capital within an organization to be able to find that kind of a success, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum. We can't just snap our fingers and then all of a sudden be impact minded and have a healthy, sustainable, productive organizational culture. So what are some of the first things that you do when you go into an organization and you try to help them kind of create a baseline and understand what it means to have a healthy, transformative culture? How do you set that baseline with them and then help them start to move the process forward to develop and maintain it?
Yeah, it's it kind of falls into one of two buckets. So there's organizations we work with that really already kind of understand their impact and they want to execute on it. And that's the majority. There's the 20-80 rule. 80% of organizations, they have that aspiration and they know they can do something more impactful, and they're wondering exactly what that is, how it aligns with their core business, and how they can use that to move forward. And so in a lot of those cases, which tend to be more the kind that are in the same situation that you mentioned, it's kind of coming in to first begin to understand where there are the pillars of alignment within the organization. That tends to start with the people. So you start to kind of hear okay, what kind of things have attracted the people to the organization? What's always been interesting to me is you tend to find, while they may have never consciously talked about it, there are certain things that brought this group of people together, certain commonalities that they have, and certain reasons that people that, they don't get it, didn't stick around in the organization, certain people did. Once you're conscious of that, you're then able to say, okay, what kind of things do we believe in? How do we help execute that? And how is that in alignment? So all of that has to kind of start with conversations first around okay, why are we all here? Why do we contribute so much of our time to this work? Why do we feel like it's important? And what things happen as a result of our work out within the world? And then how do we kind of define good around?
Yeah, that's great. And you highlighted an important facet that just kind of naturally emerges, whether we intend for it to or not. And that is that people tend to be attracted to or repulsed from our organization based on our values, based on the culture that emerges and the fit there, right? So there's a lot of research, for example, around this idea of values congruence and person-organization fit. And when those fits are out of alignment, then people self-select out, and when they're in alignment, you tend to attract those types of people. Now, often though, organizations, particularly new startups that are, and maybe they're scaling, maybe they're a little bit, they're going through the early stages of organizational maturity. They may not have like a purposeful culture that they've worked to establish. It's just kind of emerged, right? Anytime you get people together, a culture starts to emerge. And so the question becomes, is it an intentional culture? Is it the type of culture that will actually support and help sustain the organization and your purpose? Are you attracting the right kinds of people? Because it works both ways. Sometimes the culture that emerges may not be a healthy one, and you end up attracting and retaining people that fit with an unhealthy culture that actually will drive unhealthiness within the organization.
Absolutely.
So we want to be intentional. We want to be mindful about the signals that we're sending through our leadership and how that influences the culture, so that we can get the right people. So you talked about getting everyone around the table, having those discussions. What are the core values? What is our purpose? What is driving us? And that's key to be able to start to establish the baseline, so that we understand we're all on the same page about what we want our culture to be. But saying it and doing it are two different things. So what have you found as you've worked with leaders and tried to get them, first to have the discussions, the conversations, but then to move towards sustainable models of actual practice, to do what they, to have policies, practices, and procedures that are actually in alignment with their stated values and purposes. And so they're not undermining themselves through the way they go about doing their business.
It's one of those kind of weird things, because it's something that you state, and like you said, it's easier to do than to say, but at some point you have to say it and then start to make that a reality, and you've got to kind of put it out there. So it's almost like somebody who comes up to you and they say like, "Hey man, I stopped smoking." And it's like, "Oh, that's great. Like, congrats. How long have you been not smoking?" And they're like, "Last one was, 2 hours ago." And it's like, well, that doesn't seem like a historic achievement. If they stick to it, and that was indeed kind of the fork in the road, that's a big deal. And the same thing happens at the company culture level. There's a couple of things where you say like, I use us as an example. At a certain point in 2014, we said, we're only going to work with organizations that are aligned with the mission and philosophies we believe in. And then we had to go through the process of like firing a handful of clients that didn't fit. And that was kind of the harder pill to swallow, because I think especially all businesses, but especially people that have more of an entrepreneurial mindset, still have like that high score running in the background where they're like, yeah, but like revenue's the number to go after. And it's hard to cut away with that. But ultimately, after we had let those clients go, it was the fact that we said like, oh, we only work with these kind of clients. And they're like, oh, really? Like, how many of those have you worked with? Well, like 2 right now, but at some point it will be more. And then the hardest part of that, it's really easy to get people to say it and to get like really like pumped up and like, this is who we're going to be. And then to fall right back into those old behaviors. It's the hardest part, just like the quitting smoking. It's getting through that first gap and forming new habits. And those are the things you have to be really intentional about. Some people just through pure force of will do it. But for most others, you've got to have some stuff that you write down and make you kind of stick to your guns and create those new habits. Because it's just, you go through what is it? Unconsciously incompetent, unconsciously competent, consciously or consciously incompetent cycle. The same thing happens here. And so after a certain point, you don't necessarily need to look at the new rules and the processes and stuff that you wrote to help you break the old habits and enforce the new ones. It becomes a part of your DNA and just the way that you work. But people seem to think that that's going to happen magically with the flick of a switch, and that's not the case. You really got to have those things as a forcing mechanism to get you to that next place.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The mechanisms are key, especially in those early stages, and they can play out in a lot of ways, right?
Absolutely.
So So, certainly you want to have things like, clear value, mission and value statement that's on the website, that is displayed prominently in places where people can see it and be reminded of it. You want those things to be verbalized in meetings consistently and in company communications consistently. So those are kind of low-hanging fruit kinds of things everyone should be doing. But everyone knows that just because it's on the website or it's on a banner on the wall or because it's in the company email, that doesn't actually mean a whole lot if they don't see evidence of it playing out in practice. And so building it into things like the feedback loops and performance review cycles and employee onboarding and stay and exit interviews and all that kind of stuff, right? You start to build it into all those things, and then it signals to everybody that we really do feel like this is super important, that we're committed to this, and enough so that we're going to do the hard work of building it institutionally and systematically, building it throughout the organization. And then that starts to help build that muscle memory in people to develop those habits. And then you don't have to be like totally indentured to like processes and procedures, and things will flow and innovate over time, and you'll have adjustments and you need to be able to pivot. But building that muscle memory of those types of behaviors and having leaders who model the types of culture that they want to have and see amongst their leaders and amongst their people, it's just really, really important. And what I see over and over and over again is organizations that know their purpose. They've gone through those early stages of work, to define their purpose, their values, their driving elements of the organization, and even some of the processes and mechanisms, to help it to happen. But then they just don't stay the course because leaders are busy. They have a lot of weight on their shoulders. They have a lot of pressure on them. They have a lot of things vying for their attention. And often they think that, they do this initial work and maybe they spend a year trying to spin up these mechanisms and get everything in place. And now they can move on to something else. And that's not the way culture works. Like, it has to be a slow, steady drip, right? You just have to constantly be hitting it home. And once you back away from it and start to have your attention wane towards those types of healthy cultural elements, then people will naturally start to revert back to old habits, or they'll start to, cut corners, or, find different ways of doing things that will perhaps increase efficiencies, but reduce, and diminish the kind of culture that we're shooting for. So how do we avoid that? And what are some ideas that you shared with organizations in the past, and how they can sustain that kind of a healthy culture?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, and it goes through the different phases of adoption as well. So whenever you first say it, like you said, you've got to have a couple of those mechanisms in place to create that muscle memory and kind of break. But as you said, that kind of mid-adoption period, a lot of people, hey, we're busy, attention wanes, and they go back to old behaviors because that's kind of what they already know. That's where the alignment piece comes into so much play, is if you're going to go through, and we've all seen the organizations that are like, yeah, we did our core values, and it's like quality and trust, and it's like, you've got to dig deeper than the surface on these things. It's got to be meaningful work, otherwise don't waste your time. I think, I don't know if you're familiar with the Netflix culture deck that they published a long time ago, but that's a great model. Being able to kind of look through that and be like, okay, what does that look like for us? And you can clearly see in the Netflix example, there's a handful of others that have done something similar, the alignment that has with their business model. So you begin to see oh, here's how these core values truly distinguish the organization. Here's how they look for that identified in individual people. And here's how they continue to measure that. And so you've got to have some metrics attached to it. And if this is a departure from the direction you've been going, or you're making a change of course, changing momentum at any point takes, energy. And as a result, a lot of people, what ends up happening is, maybe they say it and they get pumped up, and maybe they start to get through some of that adoption, and then they start to see maybe revenue take a hit, or some people leave because they're not a good fit for the culture, and they don't have the rigor to basically see it through. And so they say, oh, okay, never mind, let's undo it. Let's go back to the way things work because it's getting uncomfortable. that chasm of discomfort is the thing you've got to be able to clear to get to the place where all that work pays off. And so that's ultimately where you've got to be able to put your money where your mouth is and apply tangible metrics that can kind of help hold you to that course. So whenever you take a look at your core values, assuming they have a meaningful, impact and alignment with your business, you attach those to each people's, quarterly review or annual review or whatever, review periods you might have. You have to apply some tangible metrics to it, and you have to be able to see how that affects and moves the business. It can't be an exercise that's divested or apart from the way that you generate revenue and the way that you guys work and the structure of the organization itself. All that stuff has to be truly aligned.
Yeah, that alignment is really key, and it's not easy to find, right? And you often you often have to have an iterative process, which also speaks to the importance of continual attention to your cultural initiatives, right? Because it isn't, like let's have a retreat, let's have some meetings, let's set it all up, and now we're launched and we're good. Like, no, it really is iterative. There's going to be ebbs and flows where you're going to learn as you go. You're going to have to make some adjustments, and then you just have to sustain the effort and the attention. And over time, again, like we've said, you start to build the muscle memory, you start to build the habits, the new processes and procedures, those mechanisms start to get more comfortable and in place. People start to self-select in and out around the culture, which reinforces the culture, and then it starts to be something that's more sustainable and maintainable. So those are some great thoughts and some great tips. Let's pivot a little bit now. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about corporate social responsibility and doing work with impact. I know you do a lot of work around that. How do you help organizations define and measure their impact so that they're ensuring that, whatever they're passionate about, like they're actually accomplishing something and not just doing things for show? I mean, positive PR, that's good, but we don't want to just do things for the PR value. We want to actually have the impact that we're desiring. So what kinds of ideas do you have along those lines?
Well, to your point, you don't want to be, what was it? I think Anheuser-Busch donated like $100,000 worth of water to the hurricane victims and then did a multi-million-dollar media buy to talk about how they donated this water. And it's like, there's truly having an impact, and then there's the impact for marketing purposes. And so we tend to be more aligned with the organizations that truly want to have some form of long-term positive impact. And the way that I kind of phrase it is, I think the organizations have to be willing to play the role of a custodian. The way technology is moving things more quickly, it's easier to move money between countries and across the globe. And so you're starting to see individuals rely on corporations almost as much, if not more than in some cases, governments to take care of people. And so if you get to have a vote with your dollar, you're going to want to support the organizations that have our collective best interest in mind. And so a lot of the thoughts around, impact tend to come back to being able to do work that you really feel passionately about. And again, feels well aligned with all of the other things we've talked about already. So how does it align with the core values? Is this work people are going to be excited and invested in doing? It's similar to Bruce Lee had a famous quote where he was like, you have to punch through your target if you're really going to maximize the amount of power. And so a lot of people, I think, revenue tends to be the target. And if that's what you're punching to, then you'll get the results at that level. But if you're punching through that to impact, what we found is the organizations we work with tend to outperform their peers. And there's, like, if you look at firms of endearment, there's books that have, analyzed that in way more detail than my, anecdotal evidence might support. But ultimately, it's being able to understand what aligns with your business model. And so in some cases, it is as simple as we work with an HR recruiting and culture consulting company. And so they realize that based on some of the research they've done, whenever they make the workplace a better place, the people go home to their families, their kids, they're more present, they're more aware, they're better educators, they're better providers, they're better caretakers, they're more available to their family. That ends up building a better, basic fabric of society. And so the way they measure impact is for every organization we go in and, basically get to have this culture lift and dynamic change, we count the lives that have been affected by that. So we count all the employees, and then because we've got a head count on them as well as their family members, that's kind of what they look at. And that used to be a thing that like really excited me, was like the aggregate numbers, to the point where we have a goal here at Yoko CO to positively impact the lives of 100 million people by the end of 2020 through the work that we do with our clients. So it's kind of an integral part of our work to help them calculate that impact. But what I found is equally motivating is the ability to just tell the story of how you've impacted a single person's life through the work that you've done. And being able to take those small stories where people can see themselves reflected back, or somebody that they know reflected back as a result of the work they've done, feels really meaningful. And what I found is it gives us a reason to kind of come, and you can come to your computer and answer emails and type away and code and design or do whatever it is you do all day and not feel like you've had any tangible difference on the world until you hear those stories. That, hey, as a ripple effect of the work that you've done, this little girl got heart surgery that she needed. This person got an education in a town. One of our clients helps provide internet, like node-based internet to tribes in Africa. One of the women there learned how to program, now programs for a company based in America, and has brought a level of wealth to her tribe that was unseen beforehand. And like, those are the kind of things that are possible. But the person who made that possible was basically just uploading a bunch of how to program content onto a bunch of hard drives so it could be delivered and set up in a node network. They would have never seen the impact of their work. And so what I find is, while the aggregate numbers are really important to be able to kind of calculate and measure your impact, those detailed stories at an individual level are the thing that get people really excited about the work they do and tend to be willing to get energy out of the work that they do, as opposed to lose energy by putting their effort into the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a combination of those quantitative metrics and analytics, along with the qualitative stories that we can really demonstrate, dig deep, and demonstrate in the lives of real people. It's powerful stuff. And it's hard work. It's hard to get to impact. It's hard to assess, right? If it was easy, then you wouldn't have organizations reaching out to firms like yours to help them do it. And I do a lot of that kind of work myself, and it is tricky work, but it's very valuable in many ways,
And
fulfilling, and it lifts everybody. So yeah. That's just wonderful.
I used to work construction, and so it was great whenever you work construction. Like, it's tiring, like you're tired at the end of the day, but you could go to an empty field and then a week later be like, that house didn't exist before. Like, we built somebody a home, and like get to see the fruits of your effort. And whenever you're just doing it here, you don't get to see any of that. And so the opportunity for those stories to come back and really let you know that your work had an impact, I think, is really meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, it has been a real pleasure talking with you. The time has flown by, and we're almost out of time for today, but I wanted to make sure I gave you a chance to take the last word, and to share with listeners how they can get more connected with you and find out more about what you're doing.
Sure. To find me personally, it's chrisyoko.com. So ChrisYoko.com. And then the company's name is Yoko CO, YOKOCO.com. And as I mentioned, we're marching towards, I think we're going to surpass our 100 million people positively impacted by the end of this year. And so we've got a couple of fun things we've been working on that I think are going to be beneficial to all of society, that we'll be able to share more on in 2021. So if you're interested in helping with that stuff and being a part of some stuff that can really help, we think in the long term change the world for the better, find us there, connect with us, or jump on the newsletter or something, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll have some exciting stuff to share at the turn of the new year.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. And it's such important work. I applaud you for everything you're doing. Thank you for all the effort around that. And I think particularly in the times that we're in, it's been a super interesting year. A lot of stuff is being thrown at people, not just with the pandemic, but with all of the socio-political and all of those things, right? There's a lot of opportunity for us to help lift each other and to strengthen the fabric of society. And we can do that in many ways, but one of those ways is through the work that we do in our jobs and through our organizations. And so as we think along the lines of corporate social responsibility and social impact through our work, the possibilities are almost endless in what we can do to benefit the world. So thank you for everything that you do. I hope listeners will reach out and get connected and find out more about how you might be able to help them. And as always, I hope everyone stays healthy and safe, that you can all find meaning and purpose in work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. We are excited about the launch of HCI's new magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine designed to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We will be publishing issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Check out the first issue and let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.